Hello.
Howdy. Sorry. Just getting set up here. Yeah. How is everyone tonight?
Good.
You good? Tired?
Tired but good.
I was not able to prioritize this paper, so I've not gotten very far. And I tried to skim, but then I saw math, so don't know how helpful skimming would have been.
Yeah, I'm going to try a little different way of going through this paper today because I'm kind of just experimenting with a bunch of things right now, and I think I'm still using Notion as a database purpose for things, but I've been playing around with the doc sheet, which I think was good for that one. But I'm gonna do a little something different with this one on Figma. I'm really enjoying using Figma as a way to get like non-linear. I think going through things linearly is something I'm interested in changing up, or at least doing mapping and connection in different ways. And I've tried different. You may recall, probably maybe only Bradley remembers this, but like I tried this like margin no and a bunch of other things in the past. So I'm kind of still playing with Figma today, and we'll see how it goes. I think I kind of want to just like pull things from a document and stick it in places and do relations that way, because I think that I better. This is a very big. Well, the document's big, but most of it's appendices, and I think I might just start with like the introduction and then discussion and see if we want to go back for some more details. But it's really interesting. But that said, I'm not sharing my screen at all. Well, it doesn't matter. But that said, yeah, any like updates you want to share about things?
Did you see the Andy Clark presentation?
I don't think so.
No.
Did I?
It was in I dropped it in Cognition Futures. There's definitely some references that he mentioned that I'd like to follow up on, but sorry, I'm in the car.
Right.
I'll follow up soon.
This one. Okay, yeah. The Royal Institute with Andy Clark. I think he's giving some big talk there.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay, yeah, looks cool. There was one, there were a couple things actually. That reminds me of, I'll mention something here that I won't get in depth with it, but I'll share something about it. My updates are basically putting a lot of Dro Pro and organization work in, and it's the kind of stuff that like, there's no like clear-cut deliverable to show for it, but it's like setting up a lot of things, and both like vision-wise, and then getting back to what am I doing with documents, and what am I doing with Notion, all those other things, and where should it be, and it's just all that like really, really messy stuff. But there is work happening on it, and I'm really happy with what's come from it, and I look forward to like having things that will make sense to other people soon. And then I'm going to meet with Bradley Friday I think it'll be with Jen for onboarding help for Google Summer of Code. So that should be cool. She has a lot of experience with like training and education and bring people into like systems. She's not a heavy tech person, which is will have a lot of insight for like education and training. I think it'll be helpful for us, and kind of Jen's done a lot of things with Joe Pro and a lot of other help. So I think it's kind of a meshing of opportunity and interest. So we'll see. Kind of like almost like not really like hiring a consultant, but like, hey, you're really experienced in this. Maybe you can help us with that on the oral side, and then maybe help with Joker stuff too. So we'll see.
Yeah.
And where is the other thing I wanted to show? Oh, this. I do want to mention this. I think this was really, really interesting. I happened to just pick it out of thin air. I'm like, oh, I'm going to go for a run. I'm going to be active and healthy and all this stuff. And I'm, good for me. But I picked this. I forgot what I searched for. And now we mentioned Brain Inspire many times. We mentioned the birthday workshop a few times. And it was sort of this interesting mix because Yogi, uh, Johannes Jaeger Yogi, was the person who totally bashed Levin's papers. Oh, I refute this entirely with the 3 papers and all that stuff. And I mean, Yogi is good stuff too in his own way. And I was curious, like, oh, well, I didn't know, I never heard like his voice or personality. So, like, is he going to be really cantankerous in this panel too or not? That was part of the curiosity. But I really, 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 really like what I heard in the panel so far. In part because can I expand this? I can't expand this. I'll just share it here. In part because there was a lot of really, I don't think it really goes into what they talk about here. But it wasn't just, the topic of the panel discussion was how can machine learning be used to generate insights and theories in neuroscience. There's a very, very good discussion around the use of models. Are using a model as a tool to understand the brain, or using a model as a means to say this is the brain, and they extended it a lot of like the philosophy of use, use, or I would say pragmatic approach. It's not really philosophy of science. It's sort of a how do you do science? I don't know. Maybe that's philosophy of science. I don't know. Like how they were talking about how to do science or how to do investigations, and they made various obvious gestures towards, okay, this affects neuroscience, but this affects life science, this affects social science too, at different points. And it was really an intriguing set of like discussion and viewpoints about it. So I might try to write up a little something on that, or do some kind of something about that, because I think it ties to quite a bit of things that like we talk about. Even though it's neuroscience centered here, there's quite a bit of things that talk about many of the issues we have, all the way from like the FQX essays to observers to, how are we using what we're calling what is a theory, how do we use a theory, and all this stuff like that. So actually I'll put this in here just to mention this. Yeah. So that's sort of my cool thing one thing I'll mention from today, from like new stuff. But that being said, I know we basically finished the biology and cognition paper last time, and kind of has a very interesting ending to that. If I had infinite time, I'd really love to make some kind of a little map notes accessible about that, just to kind of be almost like a 1970s landmark of cybernetic and different take on biology that we just reference and point to. It's like, okay, well, at this point it was here, here's where it went. But I don't have infinite time, so we'll see. Any other thing before we started? Okay.
Well, I just think that the biological cognition Wikipedia page needs to be updated.
I bet. You know what's funny? Like I've seen there's been a couple Wikipedia pages that like for the things that we've been looking at. Like I don't know a great example, but I've looked at a couple of them, and now that I'm more familiar with the spaces, it's almost like I don't know if it's sort of like school of thought wars, but sometimes there'll just be like a really clear something that's just not there. And sometimes I try to go back and look at the history, but it's just like taken out. Like oh, this is what's happening in like the history of cybernetics or the history of this field or something, and it's just very obviously not there. So I don't know.
Yeah, that's I've heard people complain about that too. That you have editors who are editors of the page, and so they kind of manage what gets put there, and it's depends on the. I know they say it's a neutral point of view, but not always, and especially when there's like different ways to view it in different parts of. You have like debates in a field or something. You know, they don't. You know, it's not like they have academic experts as their editors. Sometimes they're not. You know, they can just be editors that are more general, and so they don't. Well, it's not a view from nowhere so much. It's that, like, you know, they tried to do this with Scholarpedia, where they have like articles that are managed by people who are like experts in that topical area. They put out an article, and then people suggest edits. So I mean, the Wikipedia model is not necessarily good for, you know, debates in a field. It's more like, here's this idea, and then here's what we know about it, and you know, the way people, whoever decides that they're going to edit it, they put in their own understanding of it, and it kind of clashes with that neutral point of view. So
there used to be it was very good at the time. I don't know if it still exists, but yeah, exactly. I think Stanford's a much better.
Yeah, that's also the same sort of, someone writes an article and then they revise it.
Oh yeah, so there's no article on cybernetics, but I just sent what comes up when I searched it. But yeah, that one is at least supposed to be. Each article is written by a philosopher who specializes in the field that is relevant for that article. And it's hit or miss, but
there was a really good website a while ago too that like actually tried to structure, like it was, here are the debates on this, like it would show side by side comparisons, and I don't know if it's sort of, I don't remember anything in detail about it, but there were a few that did it even in a sort of an academic way. But I'm sure that'd be, you know, that's part of the, one of the things I've been thinking about a lot lately is sort of how much, like, we're in this era where there isn't really material history in the same way there has been in the past, and you can just you know, delete something, and what is that? What is it like to be in that space compared to a time where everything was literally or figuratively or metaphorically set in stone, in at least in terms of the rapidity of certain changes that could take place. But that's a conversation to have some other time. Anything else we wanted to say before we got into this? I guess it's a paper, a manuscript, and was accepted, but it feels a little. I think it's because when I actually first saw this copy, which is like
preprint.
Is it straight up the preprint?
Yeah, preprint submitted too.
Okay. Oh yeah. Okay. But it has this really nice like.
Oh yeah.
Which I just copied out. Like that's a pretty nice way to organize all this stuff. And they have quite a bit of like glossary and I guess appendices and other things here. But yeah, I guess we'll get started with this. So I don't know if people have any sort of initial thoughts about it. The apps. Hold on, let me get this. That's good. Basically, there's a lot of talk about control. I'm surprised control theory isn't here, but basically relating interoception, allostasis, control theory, this new model of over here, the APIC model. What does the model pertain to? You know, there's allusions to like, okay, it's kind of, it maybe is an active inference model. It maybe is like this and so on. So they're proposing a model, or what do they call it? Yeah. So let's see what they say, I guess. The brain regulates the body by anticipating its needs and attempting to meet them before they arise, a process called allostasis. Okay. Allostasis requires a model of changing the sensory conditions within the body, a process called interoception. In this paper, we examine how interoception may provide performance feedback for allostasis. We suggest studying allostasis in terms of control theory, reviewing control theory's applications to related disciplines, physiology, motor control, decision making. So this is sort of a nice paper in terms of like, you know, biology of cognition, which maybe didn't have certain things now to go something that was, you know, 22, 23 with that take on control theory and such should be interesting.
When they say control theory, what are they going for? Well, control theory for physiology, I guess, because there's, you know, control theory for like engineering systems, and then there's like there are different variations of it, like perceptual control theory in psychology, and you know they have other like types of control theory, especially in sensory motor physiology. They have control theory as well. It's like the closed loop model of regulation. So yeah, it'd be interesting to see how they kind of approach control as a construct.
Yeah, that may be a space. One of the sections we really want to look at. We can go to the whole paper too. I kind of wanted to see what people wanted to get into with that. We synthesized the problem by relating them to important properties of allostatic regulation as control problem, novel formalism for how the brain might perform allostatic control of the viscera by analogy of skeletal motor control, including a mathematical view on how interoception acts as performance feedback for allostasis. And then they suggest ways to test the hypothesis. The introduction's fairly brief, so let's kind of go through that. There's this analogy of dodgeball and you know the task of regulating all these different things going on. There was a line, but I don't know. I don't think I highlighted it in this version. Interesting. So they're calling interoception includes, but not limited to the brain's modeling of the sensory signals from innervated visceral organs, nociception, temperature. What is nociception?
The feeling of pain. It's like, yeah.
Okay. C-tactile and efferent mediated touch on the skin of these, you know, modalities. Okay. For simplicity's sake, we'll call all this visceral. Okay, so all these things that are going on. Visceral sensory signaling informs the brain, the state of the body. Okay.
What is viscerosensory signaling? The ascending signals from the sensory surfaces.
Mm-hmm. Psychology refers to the internal model, including interoception, by many terms, including memory, belief, perceptual inference, unconscious inference, embodied simulation, concepts and categories, controlled hallucination, and prediction. Regardless of what it's called, the brain is hypothesized to construct a dynamic model of its body and the world. And we call this prediction stimulation and concept, I guess.
So they use prediction, simulation, and concept as that parts of that model.
Yeah, this is their. I guess this is what they're calling this part. Yeah. The process of building or finding a model based off of those signals does not accomplish the brain's most basic task. This most basic task, apparently, is to maximize the energy of efficiency of bodily functions and comma, to anticipate changing needs, evaluate priorities, and prepare the organism to satisfy them before they lead to errors, citing Sterling. A process called allostasis. So allostasis is the brain's most basic task. According to this.
So they're not. I wonder if they're like thinking about this differently than minimizing errors. So minimizing error would be to have error, and then you're just kind of minimizing it as you're encountering it, or is it just that it just tries to avoid error? And then the difference, I guess, would be like that it, I guess it would have some sort of negative feedback involved, instead of like a sort of a matching. I don't, and I'm just curious.
Yeah, I know they'll get into this ahead, but I'm not quite sure about that either. Like there's a few when they're sort of updating and trying to make their model, they're saying here's our specific meaning. I think they do an okay job. I'm a little hazy about the middle parts. Okay, let's see. Many lines of evidence suggest the same conclusion. The brain is predictably regulating the body, which is a problem of motor control rather than of perceiving the world. Yeah, one of the big things this paper talks about is basically, I don't know how to word it very well right now, but they're, Lisa Feldman-Bear's, one of the things she said about like cybernetics and the brain before was like the brain is evolved to control, is about controlling the body. And sort of a lot of the language in this paper is about focusing on basically body control as, and not. I think at some point in the paper, I kind of want to skip after this section. I kind of want to skip to the discussion, and kind of. I think it might be easier to tease out some of the points that way, but I'll just screw everything up. Yeah. Sorry. We'll just continue this for now, I guess. Existing models of interoception, body regulation are as follows. But they have either formulated allostasis as a prospective decision-making problem, or without considering those decisions are enacted, or a motor control problem. Additionally, rather than treat metabolic efficiency as the objective, they discuss homeostasis, regulation of bodily variables, to fix set points with fixed tolerances for error. While many interpretations allow for regulation to place preemptively, to take place preemptively, homeostasis is still assumed to correct deviations from a fixed set point. In addition, homeostasis is not suited to deal with a variation in demand on bodily systems across context and time, variation that has now been well documented. This paper aims to fill the gap by proposing an initial formal model of allostatic regulation. In the, oops, no, let me do this here. I'm going to change this. In the process, it will connect existing accounts of motor control based on internal models and accounts of the brain based on feedback control, a lot of Polkaisek stuff here in Vizzulo, to the brain's regulation of body's internal environment. So that's sort of their.
Yeah, that's a Conrad Cording's in there. You've got Dominic Brzezinski is a motor neuroscientist, Gribble. Yeah, Wolpert. Yeah, it's very motor control-y.
Mm-hmm.
But so they're proposing this sort of internal model. And yeah, feedback control and regulation of the internal environment. So actually, I wonder if you could go to a couple of references. Go up a little bit. No, not those yet, but go up to the ones. So they're talking about Hulme, Morville, and Gutkin 2019.
Let's see if it's easier to do in this
Yeah,
one.
and the other one, because you don't have to keep shifting around.
This is page 3, I think. I might not be the same layout actually. What was it? Gutkin?
Yeah. If you search for the name, maybe.
Here we go. Gutkin.
Yeah, you can do that.
Here we go.
Oh.
71.
Well, that's not the same one, but
Oh.
well, that might, yeah. It's Hulme, Morville, and Gutkin. So maybe you search for Hulme even. Oh, that one right there. 27. Neurocomputational theories of homeostatic control.
Sure. Here we go.
All
Oof. Yeah.
And just let me know.
Homeostasis is the predictive regulation of internal states. Okay. Did you want to go through this or?
No, just go up to the title and then let's see. So that's homeostatic control. And yeah, actually, we could go through the highlights. I think that's enough to get the gist. So we formulate homeostasis.
I'm sorry.
Yeah. We formulate homeostasis as a predictive regulation of internal states within the bounds of survival in order to maximize fitness. So they're looking at this in terms of like a single set point, and then you're kind of moving towards that set point and you don't go beyond these sort of bounds, whatever those are. They review major theories of homeostatic control, a formal introduction to homeostatic reinforcement learning. So they're actually getting into some reinforcement learning models here. And then we explain the main advantages of homeostatic reinforcement learning as well as empirical applications and conceptual insights. Then challenges to homeostatic reinforcement learning. Now, survival constraints and active inference models could circumvent these problems. So active inference is being sort of like this more inclusive approach. I mean, if you're talking about something like homeostasis with a set point, and then you say, okay, here are the bounds of how, what's the survivable range. Then they use this approach. Maybe homeostatic reinforcement learning, maybe active inference. This would be a good review to kind of go through, not here, but maybe offline, and just get a sense of what the people are thinking about this.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and then that's why I wanted to pull it up. Okay, and then the other one is let's see, I guess Unal et al. 2021 maybe.
Oh, this one.
UNAL,
okay.
Yeah, UNAL 2021. This one here, yeah, 29.
Yeah. Yes.
Okay. Inference on homeostatic belief precision.
Body interactions.
Yeah. And so, just looking at this. This is in, I don't know, what journal is this?
Biological psychology. Yeah.
All right. And then this is more psychological directly. So the highlights are brain-body interactions, include interoception, homeostatic / allostatic control. So they've kind of combined those. Bayesian, now they focus on Bayesian theories here. So Bayesian theories of these interactions highlight homeostatic beliefs in their precision. So they use, there's a whole literature on belief modeling. I'm not familiar with it, but they're using a Bayesian model. We present novel statistical methods for inferring homeostatic belief precision. And then the performance of these methods is demonstrated using simulations. So that's good stuff. Oh, actually, why don't we look at the third one? This Petzschner, Garfinkel, Paulus, Koch, and Kalsa, 2021. Yeah, just look up Garfinkel maybe on the doc.
I was muted there. Yeah, this one here.
Yeah, that one.
What is it?
Underneath this, underneath the one on the right. Yeah, just go beneath that one.
Here?
No. The document that you were searching is below that, beneath that.
Yeah. This one.
Yeah,
okay.
that one right there.
There we go. Yeah.
Oh, I think that's the same one. Oh no, it isn't. There we go. Computational models of interoception and body regulation. And then that is in
Very special issue in neuroscience.
Trends in Neuroscience, yeah. And then they have what are the highlights there? The sensory motor control loop, that's another construct. That's like its closed loop system. Can be used as a guiding principle to align different computational models of interoception and body regulation. Recent computational frameworks formulating body regulation via flexible adaptive control mechanisms that extend classical reflex arcs. So reflex arc is where, you can, like, a good example is if you hit your knee with a hammer and your leg kicks up, and that's a reflex arc, being that, you feel that hit of the hammer, and there's a reflex that's controlled locally that pushes it up. And there's also this thing about afferent copies, where there are two copies of it that get sent to different places that kind of control that interaction on the periphery, but also in the central nervous system. So that there are a lot of models of like sensory motor control that involve things like pain or feeling like a proprioceptive input, and that are interesting. We don't want to get into like Sherrington's work necessarily, but that's kind of where it comes from, if you've ever heard of Sherrington. And then the perception and regulation of interoceptive signals, those tangible and unique challenges for modeling. Concrete computational frameworks of brain-body interactions are great for translational research. And then modeling approaches could be applied to develop testable computational biomarkers. So this is kind of more a review for people who want to apply these models to the clinic, which is good because we have these reflex arcs that we can exploit for various things. Yeah, it's interesting. They're kind of talking about forecasting in the highlights here too, which means that they have to kind of have a good predictive model. And I don't know, maybe this is a good system for that, maybe not. But so that's what they reviewed in terms of the formal models that exist, interoception and body regulation. And so and then they say that there are two different ways that we view allostasis, which are these decision-making problems and motor control problems. So like belief modeling or things like that, or modeling this sensory motor loop. And so those are your two model systems that people generally focus on. Okay, that's it for that.
Okay, this will be. Okay. I think this is. So next, the paper's formal model of allostasis draws on control theory. It deals with driving dynamical systems to move approximately along a certain desired trajectory despite physical disturbances Control theory makes explicit the question of what the desired trajectory is, and how the trajectory might be physically realized, and and how one system can drive another. The paper describes an approach to formally modeling regulation of the body that retains compatibility with previous empirical and theoretical work investigations while building upon control theory from first principles. So they're being rigorous. 4 sections in the paper connect interoception and allostasis. Over here. Section 2 establishes how interoception enables the brain to estimate the physiological efficiency in the body at the present moment, which is precisely what it needs to do to evaluate refined actions. Section 3 then introduces control theory and explains its applications in physiology, motor control, decision making. These provide conceptual tools for modeling how interoception forms allostasis. 4 applies the principles of control theory to derive a novel formal model of how the brain might estimate the desirability of these trajectories and decisions. And 5 synthesizes the previous 3 sections to explore the direct impacts on the proposed formalism. Appendix A is the glossary terms, B1, mathematical details, and C is other mathematical details. So that's their plan.
Yeah. And then one more area I'd like to look at, the paragraph above the one we just talked about.
This big,
yeah, just the end there, and I'm interested in like what they describe an approach to formally modeling regulation that retains compatibility with previous empirical and theoretical investigations while building on control theory from first principles. So all of those references there might be of use. You don't have to look them up, but just to like kind of take a note of that. Yeah. It looks like they have some Friston and Pizzulo in there, so and I assume that there's some sort of active inference thing that they're referencing.
They say it in 5. I don't know if I pulled the quote out here or not. I don't think I did. No, they say in 5 how like, well, this could be a sort of an active inference model of sorts. So maybe we'll get there. With that being said, I mean, you guys seeing this sort of layout, do you want to go through it, like go into 2, or do you want to skip around, or how are you feeling? I don't think, I think in this, I think it's actually a little more condensed in this paper than the original, because the original was quite pre-printed and spaced out differently.
Yeah, it does seem that way to me. I'm okay with whatever.
Yeah, I think I'll just take a peek at 5 and then go from there, because you can see this super appendices are like over half.
Yeah.
The thing, which is that's kind of cool in some ways, but like yeah. We'll just take a quick look at sort of how they're framing this and kind of go from there. Interoception stabilizes actions and constructs allostatic references. This paper provided a unified interpretation of allostasis in terms of brain-body interaction neural computations. It's built around circular interactions between brain and body. Their new novelty model is allostatic path integral control, APIC, and not EPIC. And then they go into interoception capacity curves, section 2, overview of interoception. each subject will end with a paragraph giving specific predictions made by our allostasis in the brain and body. So this is kind of where they're going. Interesting, Cthulhu and Kaisek stuff. Their sort of uniqueness pitch is that combination of neuroanatomy and the feedback formalism, control formalism of these active inference modeling typically interprets. I wanted to highlight this before. How do you say that? Phi? Good.
Yeah, Q sub phi, I guess.
Q sub phi as an approximate posterior belief, but we reconceptualize it as a feedback controller.
Oh, okay. Actually, okay, that was an active inference. I'm gonna take a note of that. So the active inference is, of course, using some sort of Bayesian model of posterior belief, and that is their feedback.
Yeah, and that's
and I guess that brings up a question as to, like, you can use anything. I guess you could use anything as like a feedback signal so you go into a system and you say, what is the feedback signal here? And, like with Bayesian stuff, it's easy because Bayesian stuff is very much structured like a closed loop feedback system. You have your prior, which is sort of the thing that informs your observations. So your prior is almost like a controller. And then you have your observations, which is the system. And then you have feedback, which is the posterior. It's like updating your controller. And so then if the assumption is that you have sort of this Gaussian distribution, you should be able to converge to the actual empirical result. Of course, if the empirical world is bumpy or it isn't Gaussian, then you have a problem. But that's interesting, though. Thank you.
Yeah, and yeah. And maximization. The unification with feedback controls handles uncertainty about consequences. The first term of APIC's objective function is physiological, represents the responsiveness of controlled process of the body as inferred through the interoception. The second term, which I think they mean the P, or just, objective function separates, quantifies differences between planned and actual movements, including those. How would implementation of APICS map onto the brain? We did not map formal descriptions in control theory terms to specific anatomical functions or assemblies in the brain, but nevertheless, research does suggest that the brain systems can be described in active modeling, feedback, control decision making. They give an example with hippocampal and cerebral complex cognitive map, Gershman, out of sequence episodes, and so on. Cerebellum may help exploit reafference, and I don't know how to pronounce that one. Exafferent?
I think, yeah, that's a typo.
Yeah.
I think maybe
exafferent.
I think so. Exafferent. I can't tell.
Petzschner, evidence from common functional gradients across the cerebral cortex and these areas suggests that the future empirical studies should apply common computational paradigms to different brain regions. And this is an interesting sentence, or this bit about predictions here is this. Its objective functions to produce that there's a behavior and how behavioral reinforcement and allostatic control interact. This theory has implications for primary or unlearned reinforcer with wise. According to this, the primary reinforcer arises when the dynamics of a controlled physiological process align with those of its capacity curve as a function of underlying regulated resource. If the primary reinforcer arose directly from a regulated resource, then the specific objective function formulation we have suggested would be falsified. However, this would not necessarily falsify APIC as a computational unification of decision making and motor control for action concepts. It might be highlighted there, but only this particular part would be falsified. I don't know if you want to go back to the top now or just kind of go to this. These are sort of the more like, what does it mean in the future parts? And I know I'm a little bit, I'm partly doing it this way because I know sometimes we just get so exhausted at the end of the paper, we don't really want to deal with it, but sometimes the most important stuff is that here. I don't know if there's a lot of models here, but their figures are down here too. We want to look at them. So like this one. So you said something, Amanda? Sorry.
No, I'm just agreeing with what you said.
Yeah. It's like I don't want to deal with this paper anymore.
Actually, you were talking about something else, like in that last section in 5. If you go back to that, you had it highlighted. That's why I'm pointing. So it goes up a little bit more. Yeah, the stuff about it's like the Cysic. So it was towards the beginning of the thing. Go down a little bit. Right there, maybe. Okay, yeah. That part there. The study of the embodied decision making in neuroscience.
Did you want to look at those references, or?
Well, no, I want to go through this section here.
Okay.
So the study of embodied decision making in neuroscience begins from these assumptions, and then they cite Petzschner and Cysic, which is I'm not quite sure I know what that paper is, but it'd be interesting to see. And then so let me see, Petzschner and Cysic, 2016, and then and then and an emerging body of evidence suggests that the brain controls the body by keeping many possible actions in the running until sensory feedback forces an irreversible decision. So that's Cysic 2007, Cysic and Kolaska 2010, Buzaki and Cysic. So that means that, like, instead of saying like we're gonna try to map, the controller is going to try to map things from the system and tries to like match them as much as possible. What they're saying is that you have a number of possible things that you could do. And then you get sensory feedback and it clarifies what you're going to do. So you have maybe like a buffer of like 4 or 5 actions that you could take. You see something, like you see a ball and you want to kick the ball, but you run up to it. And then, if you kick and you miss the ball, then that's like, you made the wrong decision. So you use your sensory feedback, you use like, your ability to see where the ball is relative to your foot. You feel how you're running, your stride, and then you eventually, it forces you to decide when to kick. All that feedback comes in and sort of sets this frame for how to act. And then but you could kick at any time, and there are a number of ways that you could execute the kick. And so you're operating on this procedural learning. You're operating on this sort of procedure that could take a number of paths. And in fact, you're storing those scenarios in your head, and then you're just kind of it kind of resolves itself at the last minute when you get the proper feedback. That's very much in line with like ecological psychology, or an ecological psychology model of like catching a fly ball, the classic example. But so that's interesting. I think that's I know that we've talked about Paul Cysic, his work before, but I think Cysic 2019 is the one we've talked about in the past, but some of these other references might be worth looking into.
Yeah, like this is definitely a situation. I mean, all the allostasis references kind of, we think of Avery anyway, and then the whole allostasis machine stuff, sure. But this one in particular, I actually I did not highlight, but I wanted to pull that out specifically. So that's kind of glad we talked about it here. I would summon the Avery angel on the shoulder, and there's a lot of conversations to have about stuff that Avery and I had looked at in the past, kind of about this and why there are even like why at like I don't want to say at a I don't really want to use the word psychological or mental or cognitive, but something like that. Why at that level there's sort of like biases or like quote unquote psychological lopsidedness, that why having many of these possible actions, and this is more, again, this is yes, more sensory feedback and the body, like bodily actions, but similar things in terms of almost like why there be certain preferences to interpret information in certain ways based off of having these things in the running, but also there being sort of different weights for why, even among like like uh like kind of getting towards like personality differences, but also just like actually information interpreting differences across people, across different human embodiments or mental or cognitive types of agents. So that's a very interesting space that I would definitely want to look into more, um, at this level too. I think that was still in the 5 point. Yeah. Okay. So yeah. Maybe the best way then is to kind of just go through these sections and revisit them as necessary, or dip in and out. Yeah, okay. Like we're kind of, I'm okay with going back here for everyone else's, but yeah. And okay, we have like a good chunk of time left. So part 2, the interoception. I'm gonna make it different. These are all kind of different stacks. So it's over here. Yeah. How interoception offers performance metrics for visceral motor regulation. Many interoceptive modalities consist of these signals whose values must retain specific ranges to conducive, efficient bodily function survival. A core assumption is that the brain, as part of allostasis, estimates how efficiently the physiological process can be. They talk about these different work. We differentiate 2 types of variables. Those that represent quantities of resources, called regulated resources, and those that represent rates at which processes act, called control processes. And that's how they're, there's the 2 variables to them. Yeah. This subsection suggests, I guess subsection 2, suggests that the brain predicts ongoing fluctuations in physiological efficiency. 2.3 considers a complex regulatory setting in which these several factors process and act on a common metabolic resource in different ways, and generalized proposed notion of psychological efficiency and estimation to this more common case. And then ahead they do investigate efficiency estimation and brain constructively, evaluate risky variety of predicted bodily conditions without requiring a modular reward system. So I don't know if we have any thoughts about that.
What is 2.4?
This one, yeah.
Yeah.
Do you want to go to that? Maybe?
Yeah, let's go to 2.4. Let's see what it looks like.
Here we go. Variable ranges and capacities could obviate a modular reward system. Excuse me. So they're saying standard accounts of allostasis or allostatic regulation describe it as a physiological level of analysis, attributing the control around the central nervous system reinforcement learning. And Sterling writes this. So they're saying standard accounts are about reward, and nerve spikes. The correspondence between a feeling and a specific neurotransmitter is able to establish. Yet one imagines a dopamine pulse evokes a momentary relief from flagellating anxiety and a brief sense of satisfaction. At last, the carrot. Okay.
So he's basically deconstructing the reward construct, because we use reward in reinforcement learning. And it's like, well, what is it? What is it exactly? So it's basically something physiological. It's a brief burst of spikes in neurons, and it's related to dopamine. And we talked about dopamine in the Saturday meeting. It's like how people have had this model of dopamine, and it's maybe not as neat and tidy as we'd like. And so that's a problem. But yeah, but he's basically saying that the correspondence, or the precise correspondence between a feeling and a neurotransmitter, it's hard to know what that is. So, reward is not as straightforward as you would like, because there are many intervening variables there. So you can have a lot of things that kind of are conditional things on reward. So if you get a dopamine signal, and in biological reinforcement learning, this reward signal is the thing that's sort of reinforcing, whatever it is that you're. So like that's the reward basically. If you get a reward, you get dopamine. Dopamine leads to more, and it's this feedback loop. So, but then if there are other things going on, if you have something intervening there, it's not always as straightforward as you'd like. So the picture of rewards painted here suggests a modular reward center or reward system. And this is in the ventral midbrain, but this is a artificial system. We just kind of create our own variables and parameters. Okay. However, insofar as the midbrain would function as a reward center, the reward signal sent to the rest of the brain would not carry contextual information about the bodily needs to which they refer. So this is like an intervening variable, which is contextual information. More recent evidence shows that there's no unique localized reward center or reward system in the brain. So, you could hypothesize that there's some reward center, but we haven't found one. We don't know exactly what it is. So there's this construct of reward and they say Berridge and Kringelbach 2015, which they kind of highlight this. And I'm writing this reference down. Yeah.
Let's see if I can pull it up. Berridge.
Yeah.
Okay. The preprint is actually surprisingly difficult to
Search.
navigate. Yeah.
Yeah, because they put like numbered references in and all that.
Yeah, and they're different, and then you can't like type in the search.
What was the title of that again?
Pleasure Systems in the Brain by Berridge and Kringelbach. And Neuron. Or, yeah.
Yeah, and then this, I guess, goes over the neuroanatomy of reward. But I think the point here is that, like, there's no one spot, but it's sort of distributed in the brain. You have, basically the emphasis on this being a construct, which means that you're proposing how it works. And, you could have like different ways that it works, but it's not the specific mechanism isn't important. What's important is that you can take this construct, this model, and map it to different parts of the brain. So there might be different places where you get this kind of reward behavior or this kind of reward feedback loop. But the idea is that you build a theoretical model to describe what it should look like. So you might have multiple reward centers that might fit the bill, and it might match the experimental observations quite well. And so that's the whole point of using a construct. A lot of social science use constructs to describe really kind of high-minded concepts like, positive sentiment or something like that. And you have a bunch of things that you use as measures of that, and you plug them into your model, and they should give you a good result. So this is what they're kind of getting at. So they talk about pleasure systems. Some of the best known textbook candidates for pleasure generators, including classic pleasure electrodes and the mesolimbic dopamine system, may not generate pleasure after all. These emerging insights into brain pleasure mechanisms may eventually facilitate better treatments for affective disorders. So again, we don't know. Like sometimes we pick a system that matches our construct, but sometimes there are a lot of these intervening variables that kind of, we observe it under ideal conditions, and then when we try to replicate that finding, or we try to find it under different experimental conditions, even we can't seem to get there.
Okay.
So, yeah, it's good.
I had a conversation with, speaking of Avery, I literally had a conversation yesterday with Avery about something along these lines in terms of, this is not a very good text, but I'll move this. It was something along the lines of things here and kind of some theory work around this topic. So that's cool. Yeah, okay, we'll go back to this. So that was Barrett and Kringelbach. Here we go. I don't know if you want to continue going through this.
Yeah, so this is more reinforcement learning sort of stuff. Since there is no single brain site that specifically encodes any sort of reinforcement value, it is useful to reframe discrete reward and decision systems as a domain general allostatic control system. So I guess what they're saying here is that there's this sort of, we're looking at allostasis as sort of almost like a reinforcement learning model where, our goal states, or what you might call a goal state, is actually like a policy that actually is highly rewarding or highly sort of matches the imperative for survival or whatever you want to call it.
Mm-hmm.
So this is interesting how they're bringing reinforcement learning into this quite directly.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and then the domain generality of interoception provides further theoretical support for the idea that we don't need mental modules or faculty psychology concepts to understand how a brain works. So we don't need to bring in a lot of mental sort of, we don't have to invent special things, I guess, to see this. Because there's this tendency to build. What was that?
This is more universal and less compartmentalized.
Yeah. But I mean, you might invent a concept for a specific type of regulation. Like you might say, well, in face perception, we might have special neurons that do this, or we might have special sort of things that the brain does to process this. And we start inventing all these things that are very specific to that thing, that area. And when in fact it might just be a more general mechanism that operates in different contexts.
There's a bunch of things. Okay. Feel free to jump in for anything. The ideas of section 2 and 2.3 can be usefully combined here when considering the control plots that regulate the same underlying resource. From this perspective, interoception prediction errors in the context of decision-making experiments can be interpreted as learning about rewards via reward prediction errors. Movement towards the operating costs, the certain operating point can then be considered a reward, and away from it can be a cost. These movements can be weighed according to the same capacity curves, gain or inverse tolerance. The relative worth of adapting to a load on one innervated organ system versus another. So they're doing some work about loads on organs and as part of their allostatic model.
That comes from Sterling. That's so the idea would be that there's this load of, if you're moving away from an operating point, that would be a higher cost, that would be a greater load. If you're moving towards an operating point, that's a greater reward. And so the reward would lessen that load. And the idea would be that you want to minimize the load on the system. So it would be like if you were sick, if you were sick all the time, or if you were, working in an environment where there was a lot of continual stress, that would be, that load, that would be a cost, and that would be, away from your operating point. And so then it might have long-term consequences because you have this allostatic load that might then lead to, maybe pathology later on. So it's this idea that, you have like this precursor for something like a nervous breakdown, or like you have a stress-related problem later in life, something like that.
Excuse me. So, given this new view, or in this view that's not based on a modular reward system, the neurotransmitters produced by unmyelinated and lightly myelinated interoceptive nerve fibers could play a role in signaling capacity curves. These neurotransmitters, which are commonly thought to act as teaching signals. In support of the suggestion, dopaminergic. Yes. In the ventral tegmental area in mice have been modeled using this mathematical functioning, including our capacity curves. Again, there's talking about the reward system. I was saying it requires a brain and viscerosensory peripheral nervous system to behave as if parameters for capacity curves describing how adaptable any given state would be to unexpected disturbances were signaled alongside the location of current physiological states corresponding on the corresponding capacity curves. Different physiological needs, like body temperature versus blood glucose levels, could then be added, subtracted, compared by comparing the distance of the current state from the operating point in a given dimension, scaled by the capacity's curve gain. Our formal model later will make this idea more precise, providing a way to put numbers to such distances and movements. Okay.
Wait a minute. Let's go back to this paragraph. I like this. So let's see. This part rather it starts rather if simply. They're talking about this account of allostatic control. It doesn't require a modular or separate reward system in the central nervous system. It just simply requires a brain and a viscerosensory peripheral nervous system to behave, and this is the critical part, as if parameters for capacity curves describing how adaptable any given state would be to unexpected disturbances. So that would be like if you knew, like, had a sense of what might lead to a heart attack, or what might lead to like diabetes, or what might lead to some other thing that might be sudden onset, which we don't know, but maybe we have an intuitive sense of it. Maybe our physiological system has an intuitive sense of sending pain signals if you're before you actually get to the acute stage of something like a heart attack. There's pain signals that are sent out. And I think pain's a good example because we get pain signals that are sort of warning signals. You don't want to like break your ankle, you just kind of feel when it's twisting the wrong way. And that's, so that might be interesting that there might be that information physiologically that it isn't necessarily like a psychological model or like a reward model. It's just kind of like there that describes it. It says ouch instead of and then that was signaled alongside the location of current physiological states on a capacity curve. So different physiological needs, body temperature versus blood glucose level could then be added, subtracted, compared. So that's actually very cybernetic. Like, we talk about like positive and negative feedback, or compound feedback, or things like that. And that gets into like information processing, which Norbert Wiener talked about, in terms of like the cybernetic machines and the body and things like that. But it's interesting to see how that's kind of they're almost setting it maybe as opposed to reinforcement learning, or maybe as something that's complementary to reinforcement learning, but not, it doesn't require to have this formal system of rewards, because not everything is reward driven. It's easy to have like a reinforcement learning model, say for motivation, like for dopamine involved things. But like if you have like the peripheral nervous system, you don't have those easy systems of rewards. So then, what's regulating it?
Yeah. Very much good stuff. So we're some kind of summary of this section for the whole two, and two's I think specifically just interoception and what do they call it? Modeling the body, estimating its efficiency. So it looks like they're taking interoception as having this role, and then viable ranges and capacities could be obviate the reward system. The summary is so we have a proposal for how the nervous system could potentially function to coordinate and control organ systems across time scales to provide allostatic regulation of the body. We consider the movement of physiological systems response curves. So in figure 1, which I don't think, was there a figure here at all? It's got an equation. Okay, well. The idea of actual systems, operating loads, okay, provides a foundation for allostatic regulation. We extend the idea of capacity curves to system based on more behavioral settling point regulation. In such system, the brain functions at the top level of a hierarchy of control scheme, regulating the lower level controllers. In 2.4 reason, the movement toward or away from the responsive range of a capacity curve can be treated as reward or cost, respectively, suggested that this could potentially obviate the need for a directed neural circuit to module that specifically calculates the behavior or constructs of reward and cost. Cognitive neural supports this The brain lacks such modules, suggesting that we may get empirical theoretical traction by investigating decision making from this point of view. And then ahead, we'll build on these ideas by introducing control theory, and consider the use of control theory in physiological regulation, motor control, decision making, as well as for control theory to unify previously disparate views of bodily regulation. And then we build upon these to propose a formalism for allostatic decision making. Embodied decision making includes all three of the forms of uncertainty to which allostatic regulation is subject. What is physiologically efficient, uncertainty about the consequences of movements, and uncertainty about the external world. Any thoughts about that? Okay. We're doing okay in time. This has been a better way to go about some of this, so that's good. So here we get in the big, they're going to introduce control theory as a unifying lens. Yeah. Yes. So however, interoception is perception of the inactive body. It can include sensing allostatic responses of the present states of the body as achieved by past action, but it cannot produce present and future actions of itself. Little slight echoes of much wrong stuff. The latter role is of visceromotor control processes. The latter is the role of, I guess, these future and present things. They're saying is the latter is the role of the visceromotor control process to investigate how the brain accomplishes these things that produce present and future actions. Some additional theoretical tools are required. This section introduces these concepts from engineering control theory. These include physiology and the rest. We'll connect future interoceptive. Then 3.4 will connect future interoceptive states to present moments, illuminating what makes allostatic regulation more energy efficient than homeostatic regulation. The next section builds off the account of this to suggest how interoception supports allostasis. Just do this.
That's interesting that it's more energy efficient. I guess because it's not trying to always regulate to a set point. It's kind of like you have this different model where it's like balancing needs dynamically. So it's not like, it doesn't like try to really spend a lot of time struggling to get back to a set point if you're very far away from it, especially after a disturbance. And, you just have to find the nearest safe harbor, I guess. And that's where you end up. It's just clarifying in my mind as to like how other people are thinking about allostasis and the state of the field. I think it's interesting because I've only really read up on Sterling's approach to it, which I think they're also citing here. But it's interesting to kind of think about this in terms of like cybernetic regulation. So we talk about like feedback being like this sort of hammy relationship between the regulator and the system and all this. But then, if we think about this in terms of the needs of, what you need to sort of reach a stable state, almost like a more of a dynamical systems view, it starts to make more sense. It starts to make more sense. You don't have to invent like all these, observers and things like that. I mean, you can have an observer, but it seems like in cybernetics, they kind of went off the rails with that. Like, they kind of, gave the regulator a lot of agency, and that you couldn't really map to any one system, and it required a lot of things like that. And this is maybe more, okay, this is how, this is a practical way of kind of reaching a stable state.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think the point about kind of the way cybernetics went off the rails is on point, and kind of even at that level, and then it kind of went like.
Well, sometimes, I don't really mean to say off the rails, but more like when you have a certain theoretical model, sometimes you have to come up with ideas that kind of conform to the model. And some people are tempted to just say, I'm going to make my model more internally consistent than to say, let's rethink this concept, and then, let's make sure that we're being, because good theories are supposed to be sort of generalizable. And, sometimes they're not going to be generalizable. Sometimes you just try to fit things into the model when they don't really do a very good job of being like parsimonious. They don't, they're not the best explanation. They're kind of the explanation you have instead of the explanation you want. So, what was that?
Epicycles.
Yeah.
Whoops. Yes. And then like some of the like really derivative things or something actually pretty much went off the rails. Like I got that. I initially guys like I got a $4. I just out of like I like in these bookstores you find like the really like wacky like psycho-cybernetics. Like you can effectively regulate like your whole life. And it's like,
I've seen that. I know what you're talking about.
And then it's kind of it's cute in a way, and it's nice to like make it, when I have my crazy idea theory thoughts, I'm like, it's nice to have a sense of like, well, you're gonna have a good idea, and you don't want to make it really rigorous and go someplace, and you can sort of envision what like your version of what is going to be your personal version of that. Like if you push your idea and your theory forward, what's going to be the wacky thing that just might come off with that you may want to avoid, but you maybe can't avoid. Like that's just part of trying to do stuff sometimes, but it's also yeah. Anyway, we have about 5 minutes left. Well, 7-ish minutes. Do you want to try to go through this, or do you want to save it for next time, or how's everybody feeling for that? We can maybe get a little bit further here. What do we have? Okay, it's a longer section, but we'll just take a peek at it. A reliable body built from unreliable parts. I think one of the was it in the introduction, or was it? I don't know if we read it or not. But basically, it said how the body can only do one thing at a time, but the brain has to sort of keep all of those potentialities and also regulate the organs and potential to do those things in ready. And I think that was a very nice point to start with. Control theory deals with driving a physical system towards a desired trajectory, even when the system is built from unreliable, unpredictable parts. Control theorists call the driven system the plant, and its desired trajectory the reference trajectory. Generally, a plant must be made to conform to its reference trajectory by a driving system called the controller. These systems are thought to be separate physical entities within the connection system, connections with the connections between them, and along these connections, the system transmit signals to each other. The reference signal that specifies the reference trajectory goes into the controller, and signals that leave the controller and enter the plant are called controls. Controls affect the state of the plant over time. Signals that leave the controller and enter the plant. Right? The reference signal is thought to derive from a source that is external to the system, such as an engineer, machine, operator. We have a block diagram. I wonder if I can just pull this up here on the other one and not lose our space as much. Is this it? Is this, that's figure 6. We're looking for figure 4. Like, here we go. Almost there. Here we go. Figure 4 shows an example of block diagram of the NDA control system for our edification. Right. Yeah. Okay. I don't know. Yeah. So this goes quite a bit into control theory. We can. I don't know how much we'll want to wager that directly or not.
We should leave that to next time, I think.
Yeah, I think that's probably worth taking differently.
We can just take a quick peek at figure 4 though, that you have in there.
Yeah, I'll pull this whole thing over here. And, yeah.
Okay. So that's your controller, your plant, your state estimator, your task instructions. This is not this is not a cybernetic closed loop feedback, first order feedback loop. This is a control theory version of this. So the plant is the object or system whose motion or other behavior is controlled. So the plant, in the sense of cybernetics, would be like the system. The controller would be like the controller, or the regulator, I guess.
Yeah.
And then the state estimator would be like a feedback mechanism, but then it's also kind of like a thing that's estimating. So like in control theory, you're trying to estimate the state. You're trying to do something very specific with the feedback, as opposed to in cybernetics where it's just like feedback does this, because there's this mathematical function we'll use to govern control. So you can have nonlinear control, and then but in cybernetics it would just be more generic. It would just be the feedback, and the task instructions, I guess, would be maybe like the model of regulation, where in this case again, you're trying to do something deliberate to a system. So you're trying to, it's like some algorithm or something, and you're putting it into the controller. The controller is implementing the algorithm in real time, observing the plant, estimating the state that's needed or the state that the plant is in, and then it goes to the controller. The controller sends the output back to the plant to say, stay within the parameters that we need you to stay in. And then that's supposed to be very highly effective. If you think of something like autopilot on an airplane, this is the kind of thing that you have. You have the plant, which is with the state of the plane, basically, the attitude, the altitude, the speed. The controller being the thing that says this is the way it needs to be. These are the desirable states. The state estimator estimates the state of the plane, and then the controller has to make sure that the plant remains within the desired parameters. And the task instructions might be like an algorithm that tells it how to do that, or basically gives the controller something to implement in real time. So that's comparable with cybernetics, where we just have this regulator, we have this system, we have feedback, and we don't know if they're task instructions could be anything really, but it's probably not separate from the regulator. So I don't know if anyone's ever really made a side-by-side comparison of a control theory loop and a cybernetic loop. If there's a paper that does that, I know think they cite anything here specifically, but
So I think this brings us to the top of the hour. Yeah, really cool stuff. Any concluding thoughts versus out loud we want to mention before we close today? No, yeah. It's been nice to kind of go through this paper this way, and I'm going to organize this. I know it's a bit messy right now. It's kind of, I think I might have tried to prepare some of the like categories that I'm working on, but I'll clean this up more for next time, and then we can start review that and go through this again. But no, good stuff. We don't have no cybernetics meeting tomorrow, right? Not this week.
That's right. And I think I picked a paper for the following week. It's one of the ones that was linked in the Slack. It starts with a Maturana quote, naturalizing relevance realization. I'll share it.
That sounds good for next time. But then I'll talk to you maybe this weekend or sooner. All right, take care, everybody. Have a good one.
See you soon.
Bye.
Bye.